Welcome to the Capital Connection, a weekly program questioning New York State leaders on a variety of issues. Your host is Dr. Alan Chartock, political scientist and professor emeritus at the University at Albany. Distribution for the Capital Connection is made possible with the help of New York State United Teachers, representing professionals in education and healthcare, online at nysut.org.
It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm Alan Chartock. On the program with us this week is my old friend and colleague, Dr. Gerald Benjamin, SUNY Distinguished Professor of Political Science, Associate Vice President for Regional Engagement, and Director of the Benjamin Center at SUNY New Paltz since 2008. Welcome, Jerry Benjamin. So, Jerry Benjamin, we're here to talk about something very dear to your heart, the Constitutional Convention, and whether New York voters should vote for one or against one. Should there be a constitutional convention?
Absolutely. If we want to restore home rule, if we want to address the ethics crisis in New York government, if we want to rebalance our institutions, which are way out of balance with a governor too powerful, if we want to give the Attorney General a constitutional basis for his desire to be a criminal prosecutor, if we want to straighten out the courts, which cost us an extra $500 million a year and nobody understands how they're organized, those are a few of the things we can do. If we want to make legislative districting fair, we need a constitutional convention. Certainly the legislature is never going to do any of those things.
I guess the question then is, what is going to make this constitutional convention work?
Who will be elected? Well, the people of New York will determine who will be elected. And I'll tell you what, if we call a convention, the first thing that's going to happen is that we're going to have a review of the process for nominating an election, because we have a 19th century process and we're now in the 21st century, and there are some rules and standards for elections, federal, for example, that did not exist in the 19th century. So we will have a thorough review before those elections occur. The nominating process will be open to partisan primaries. And I, for one, if not nominated for a delegate and there's a convention, will run in a primary against whoever else seeks to be nominated. As I'm involved in a group now, there's over 100 members. Many of them will run from all across the state. They're not incumbent politicians. We must admit and understand that people who are interested in politics will run. But we also have to recognize that since the presidential election, massive new mobilizations have occurred across the state. I've been appearing before groups that didn't exist before the Sanders candidacy. Mm-hmm. And they're all mobilized and all interested in running. And these are non-incumbent jobs. Nobody's holding the jobs now.
I want to ask you some of the things that you said going into this conversation. You raised certain things that you'd like to see done in a constitutional convention. One is home rule. Explain what that's all about.
Home rule is, there's an Article 9 of the New York State Constitution which tries to give a degree of autonomy to local government in their in what they can do and how they organize themselves. And this article has been undermined by Court of Appeals decisions that favor essentially produce state dominance in most areas, not all areas, over local government. So the taxi cab regulation across the state is with the New York State legislature. The size of the sugar drink that you can sell in New York City is subject to action of the New York State legislature. The legislature is entirely too often into local matters, so we have to reconsider how we define the distinctions between what the legislature and the state should do and what the locality should do.
So you want to give more power to the localities and take some of it away from the state. Is that the bottom line on this?
Well, I want the localities to be able to do local things and the state to do state things. The state shouldn't be in the business of governing localities. New York City government is essentially a fight between New York politicians elected to go to Albany and New York politicians elected to go to City Hall about who should run New York City. That's not the way it should be. But we have to take out the language from the Constitution that's led to these interpretations and replace it with language that would more likely produce a degree of local autonomy on local matters, not on all matters, on matters that are local. And it's within our capacity to do that.
One of the other things that you brought up in the very beginning of the show was that you want to see ethics reform in the legislature. How do you want to do that?
Well, I think we should have an ethics institution, an ethics entity embedded in the Constitution with real powers, and with the appointment to this board not controlled by incumbents and its actions not controlled by minorities from one or the other house of the legislature.
The two things that, I care about a great deal, and we've talked about this many times, Jerry, are initiative and referendum, which I am a great believer in, even though a lot of my fellow political scientists don't like it. And the other area, of course, is something that is very popular in New York City, but not New York State, which is term limits.
First of all, let's take term limits. If we had fair and competitive elections, we wouldn't need term limits. But we don't have fair and competitive elections because the conditions under which legislators and statewide officials are elected are defined by them to their own advantage. So I am for term limitation.
But I wonder what else you got in mind.
What else do I have in mind? Well, look at the budget process. Look at the so-called big ugly that we now have, with all substantive matters being driven into the budget and everybody wanting their substantive goal in the budget. I think that the governor is entirely too powerful in budgeting, and I think the legislature, we ought to rebalance this. And interestingly, the legislature stands to gain, even though all their leaders are against opening up a positive or negative about a convention.
Well,
the legislature is the locus of representative democracy, and the spending power in American democracy should be and is with the legislature, not with the governor. No single person should decide what we spend our money on that we raise by taxation. It's a representative system, and it doesn't operate properly. It needs to be reformed, but it's still, we must remember that we are not a quasi-dictatorship.
What else you got?
Judicial reform. We have the least well-organized judiciary in the country. One study done in 2007 by a commission appointed to look into it said that simplification and reorganization of the judiciary would save litigants and the government $500 million a year. That was in 2007, 10 years ago. We've known what we need to do for years and years. There's been study after study, but nothing happens because the entrenched political powers want to keep the judiciary just the way it is and control appointments to judicial office, or elections, I should say, elections to judicial office. So we need to address judicial reform, and the leaders of the judiciary know this. They know this, but they can't break the logjam on this question. So that's fundamentally important, and given insufficient attention in the debate we've been engaged in so far. Do you take a chance on and try to get change by going around the sclerotic institutions that we have, where you take no chance and say, I'm chronically ill, I have to live with it, so I'm going to go on and live with it? Do you try to repair the situation or not? Because what you've got is unacceptable.
Our guest has been SUNY Distinguished Professor of Political Science and Associate Vice President, Regional Engagement Director at the Benjamin Center, Dr. Gerald Benjamin.